Good morning. I'm Leonard Hamlin, Canon Missioner of the Washington National Cathedral. And on behalf of our Dean, as well as my colleagues, I'd like to welcome each and every one who has joined us on this morning to our follow-up conversation that took place on April 9th. We know that we gathered as faith leaders on April 9th, wrestling with the evergreen and ever-living question that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. posed to us that says, where do we go from here? And in the 2 weeks since we have had our original conversation, many things have taken place. We've shifted once again, and it often appears that we're shifting on a daily basis in everything that we are dealing with. And often at times, it does feel as if we are wrestling with the same issues as well, over and over again. But today, I'm grateful that we have an opportunity to continue our conversation and to join uniquely with all who are present and joining us in this space on this morning, that we may be able to respond to your questions or questions that will be lifted uniquely. We invite you to share your questions through our chat, but uniquely, we will also be bringing voices onto the screen with us so that you can ask your questions directly. And as we walk together in this moment, we will, as faith leaders and community leaders, seek to respond from our positions that we may be able to provide a witness of community, a witness of searching and seeking together, but knowing that we are better together than we ever are individually. I'd like to thank once again Martin Luther King III, who is principal at the Drum Major Institute, for joining with the Cathedral in this moment and other moments as we are seeking to bring change and transformation in the world in which we live, not just in the local settings, but across this country. And we know that now digitally, our conversations are reaching throughout the world. So we're thankful, and I'm thankful to him for his presence on this morning. I'm grateful once again to welcome back Dr. Keith Bird, who is pastor of Zion Baptist Church and also second vice president of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. Grateful to welcome back and have him join us as well, Imam Talib Sharif, who is president and imam of Masjid Muhammad here in Washington, D.C. And so I'm thankful for his voice and his presence in this moment. And then to welcome and thankful that he is returning Reverend Dr. Paul Smith, who is a mediator and civil rights activist and a retired pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Brooklyn, New York. Thankful for his wisdom. Many of you know in our first gathering that Rabbi Lauren Holzblatt was with us, and she is unable to join us this moment as she is wrestling with following up on her COVID vaccines. But I'm thankful this morning to have Susan Sloane join us on today. As she comes to us today, an author, Susan Sloane, she's also an associate director in a global Jewish advocacy organization. And she comes to us as both an advocate as well as a gender and diversity expert. And I'm thankful that I have had the opportunity to work with her and join with her in local as well as international conversations with others in order that we would address shared issues along race, diversity, many of the organizational and systemic problems that we know exist uniquely here in the United States, but also too throughout the world. So thank you, Susan, for joining with us and being with us on this morning. And so as we come this morning, just as we welcome you, Martin, if you would like to just offer words of welcome, and as soon as you're done, I'll start us off and bring in our questions.
Thank you, Reverend Hamlin, and let me say thank you to the Cathedral. We really appreciate this opportunity to collaborate as it relates to the Drum Major Institute. As we had the conversation with Rabbi Holtzman, with Dr. Bird, with Dr. Smith, and Imam Sharif. And I'm certainly glad to join each of you back again today, along with Susan Sloane. You know, this is a very unique, we all know, time in the history of our nation and world. And even as we gathered a little before April 4th, which was aired April 9th. While there were a lot of things going on, and there always are in our nation and in our world, it seems to me that faith leaders, I think, have a unique responsibility, particularly from the different faith communities. It's not up to any one of us, one organization, one institution, but it's all of us working collectively. I hope to create what my father talked about was the beloved community. And that's a quest that we are in search of as a nation, I hope, in a world. And again, as Dad's last book said, where do we go from here, chaos or community? Oftentimes we see chaos, but we should always be in seeking community. And so, Reverend Hamlin, again, thank you for this opportunity for us to come together.
Well, as we come, this is a unique opportunity, I know, for many who have joined us today, and that the pandemic has caused us to have to separate and relate to each other uniquely. And so as we have this opportunity, I'm thankful that we're going to bring on screen a few voices in this hour time that we've set aside, where questions can be asked directly and engaged. So I'm going to ask that our support, and I'm grateful for Margaret Rawls from the Cathedral, who is working behind the scenes, that she'll be bringing up our voices. So Ariel, we would like to welcome you this morning and give you an opportunity to pose your question that all of these faith leaders and civic leaders would be able to respond. Welcome.
Hello. Good morning. I'm Oriel Europe Green. Thanks to the Cathedral for hosting these continuing conversations, and thank you to the esteemed panel for enabling this important dialogue. So my question is, how can faith leaders join with elected leaders, police unions, and Black communities across this nation to address the pandemic of white police officers continuing to shoot Black and brown people weekly with impunity? Even after the death of George Floyd and worldwide Black Lives Matter protests and condemnation, this is now, in my view, a national emergency which can escalate out of control and impact all of us. Where do we go from here in finding solutions?
I'd like to open it up, certainly, and feel free to the panel for who might want to address that, as well as sharing experiences of work that is taking place now.
Reverend Hamlin, I'll take a shot at this one. I think that it's a very, very important question. And to me, at the core of the question is trust, because the question has to do with how can the faith community work with the government, whether it be local or federal government, to address this very serious problem. And I do agree that it is a national emergency, and it has been, and it's just more to the front now. And I think it starts with trust between the faith community and the government, that we really, in the government, have a partner who is serious about justice, who is serious about not just seeing these as various instances across the country involving our young Black men and police officers, but that there is a systemic issue. And so we need partners of good faith with regard to the faith community, specifically talking about the government, who are willing to address the systemic problems of racism that express themselves not just in law enforcement, but in other areas of local and federal government. And it's going to be difficult to really address the problem in its totality without that kind of trust in terms of partners who are serious about taking down this systemic racism problem in this country once and for all. And so I think it does rest with governmental agencies, partners, and persons of leadership, whether it be mayors, council members, governors, and the like, who are serious about addressing this systemic racism.
Others who'd like in this moment respond?
It seems that Dr. Bird has zoomed off for a moment, but I say amen to that. And to add to it, during my book, when I was interviewing more than 30 women leaders from around the world, I interviewed General Singh, who was the general during the Baltimore protests and riots, and working with the National Guard. And what she said to me was that we need to think more broadly about who is at the table. We need faith leaders, we need civic leaders, we need military, we need government, we need police, all coming together. In addition to that, we need mothers, and we need to look around who is at the table. Who are those faces? Is it diverse? Is there gender parity? Because we all come from our own lived experiences, and we need to bring those lived experiences to come up with better solutions. If we're thinking about policing, if we're thinking about our Black and brown brothers and sisters being arrested at unprecedented numbers and killed at unprecedented numbers, we need to think about who is at the table solving these problems. And it is only with our collective good of coming together from a diverse perspective that we're going to come up with better solutions.
Let me say, as we're addressing and even responding in the many voices, that we raise this issue, and those who know me well know that I often speak about relationships, because I think we are attempting to solve issues, which we should, but we're not seeking to have relationships yet with one another. There's a wonderful publication years ago, and I know I've characterized it as wonderful, but the title was, Cracks in the Melting Pot, that we are becoming more aware right now of the cracks that have always been there. And now we have to find a way and need to address this through our relationships with one another. There will always be issues, but one thing that helps us to address any issues is, as Dr. Bird and of course Susan are relating to right away, is that trust and who's at the table. I grew up in a time where, of course, community leaders knew one another and had relationships with one another. Of course, communities were a little bit different back then, but we're in a different time, which means our relationships now have to be different. And so I'm thankful to these leaders who are here today. And part of the reason why they're here is because of the relationships we have with each other.
So one of the things that that you raised, Dr. Hamlin, and it's what I'm about to say is certainly going to be controversial. The definition of trust has to be re-examined. And I understand trust in terms of what's been happening. But if you're waiting for my trust and I'm waiting for your trust, you're going to be waiting a long time, because there are too many things that have made it impossible for me, quote, to trust you. But because I don't trust you doesn't mean I can't have a relationship with you. So there's sort of this dialectic between what it means to trust and what it means to have a relationship. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think Maxine Waters was misinterpreted in terms of what she says. I would put what she says this way. I think to be a leader during my days in the civil rights movement was you had to be prepared to be hurt or even die. And there's no preparation for that. There's no understanding of that. And I'm not saying just, you don't want to go looking for crosses to bear. I'm not saying that. But you have to remember and be prepared for consequences. When I got on that plane rather, and went to Selma, I knew there was a possibility that I might not come back. And while I was in Selma, Viola Luiso was one of those who did not make it. She was murdered. So I think there needs to be a place where we can really talk about what are the consequences of being really active, putting your life on the line. One of the business leaders, I don't have permission to use his name, but who was part of the Black businessmen, making comments about the Georgia law. Well, this person was, he had to unplug his phone. He had to get bodyguards simply because of the position he took. And I said to him, well, you're not in that ivory tower of corporate America. You're out here where everything is happening. So I think there's a certain kind of preparation, even in our hearts and our minds, that we can be hurt. And I think what Representative Waters was saying, there has to be more of that, to be prepared for consequences. And I don't see that happening, except maybe with the anarchists.
Yeah, and I actually, I'm just complimenting what everybody else has said, because some of the same thoughts I've had as well. And we are here today upon the life, works, and sacrifice of our beloved Dr. King. And he's not here with us physically, but we are all to give him a good life. His life has been extended. We're still speaking about him. And every time I see his son, dear Martin III, and hear him, we're reminded about him. And when we look at some of the things he said, it touches on where we need to go. One of the things that he mentioned about the content be looked at not by the labels, but by the content, what we have. When we look at that, now trust, obviously we're faith leaders. Now, there is no faith if there's no trust. In fact, we know in the language, in the Islamic language, you can't even say the word faith, because in the word itself is the word trust. And there is no trust without faith. We should be able to have faith in our law enforcement. But again, as he's saying, there's the content level. So there has to be, I work with extremists, white extremists and Islamic extremists. And in both of those categories, we work with those who they're ex-extremists now, but what has helped them is they've created there's relationships, but then there are meaningful relationships with those to whom they had on the end of their hate. So we have to be able to create meaningful relationships. And when we have meaningful relationships, then we're able to get past the labels and see the content. So we have law enforcement has to have built in, and the faith community has to have an obligation, responsibility to make sure that there is interaction that's going on that creates meaningful relationships. It's not enough for them just to be in the community. No, they have to have relationships have to be established and created. Why do trust? I mean, the baby comes here, it doesn't know it has faith first, but it trusts mama because it begins to know mama. It trusts daddy because it's going to know daddy. We have to have those kind of relationships. And really what we're speaking about is what our dear beloved Martin just said, the third, about the beloved community. That term community, that's the making of a community. This unity. We are a part of each other, not at each other. It's not us and them. It becomes us. And we won't have the progress that we need until we begin to see them as us. And they begin to see us as them. And we begin to have meaningful relationships upon the best of human aspirations and motivations.
Thank you very much. Aria, hopefully that is a helpful response. On Eddie's line. Hopefully that's a helpful response as we seek to move forward and address that. And we thank you for asking your question. We're going to ask that we bring up our next question at this time and bring them on screen. And we're grateful once again for those who are placing your questions as we bring you on screen with this unique opportunity to engage with these leaders that I'm grateful to have this morning. Please, and welcome this morning. I think our next question is, it looks like it's coming from Bob. Bob, welcome this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Reverend Leonard. I'm grateful to be here with you panelists this morning, and I thank you for for being here to inspire us further today and answer our questions. I'm Bob Wolson from Santa Rosa, California. My question to you is this. In your remarks on previously reported on April 4th, you encouraged us to get out of the pew and into the public square and to act with our feet. In his comments that day, Senator Warnock said his work as a senator is to link faith and justice. This week, my wife, Miriam Casey, facilitated an ecumenical advocacy day delegation climate crisis meeting with Senator Feinstein's office. Alexis Siegel, the senator's legislative aide for the environment, told the advocates from California that church voices are very powerful because they bring the link between faith and science to the climate conversation. The realization of the power of people of faith's voices really struck me this week. So my question to you is this: how do we inspire people of faith to use their God-given powerful voices to act? What can I do? What can you do? What can our, as communities of faith, can we do to inspire our sisters and brothers to get out of the pews and into the public square, to act and keep acting, doing their part to build the beloved community?
Shall I offer that, of course, at first for our faith leaders?
Well, we've been asking, that's a question that has been asked down through the ages, and it's an important question. What's different today, but may also be a reason people need to get out of the pews? People in the pews are hurting like they've never been hurting before. Mm-hmm. That doesn't give them a pass, but it gives us an opportunity to feel their pain on top of what they could do because they are a part of a congregation somewhere. But their reality is their reality, and it's not as easy these days for people to move from the pew to the streets, because the streets are dangerous. And that's why I said earlier, you had to be prepared for consequences when you decide to march. You have to be ready for the consequences when you make a statement, when you take a stand, and you have to prepare for that. What we did years ago in the movement, we had nonviolence training, and that was very helpful to me. I was in my 30s at the time. I was eager to go, and they said, no, we want you to go, but you need to understand what you're going to, and that to face what you're going to face, you need to know some things. You need to be prepared for some things. So I'm not sure how prepared our congregants are, or even ourselves. How prepared are we to join or to lead our people in the pews? How prepared are we to lead them to the streets?
Let me add something, or at least a perspective to what Dr. Smith just stated, because I think the question is, a part of the question becomes, how do we choose to engage as communities? And everyone does not have to march. That is certainly that is one method to bring about change. But because of the advent of technology, and we've obviously seen movements inspired by, social media. If we go back to, the Middle East, and now the name slips me, but, when Egypt came together. I forget the exact name. A few years back, it was the mobilization through social media where millions or hundreds of thousands of people came together to protest at that time. And it happened several places in the world.
The Arab Spring, yes.
That's it, Arab Spring, yes, absolutely, thank you. Such a profound experience. And I think some of our bigger questions become, how do we expand our consciousness in a real sense? Because our perspectives are actually developed by, as Dr. Smith said, our experiences. I mean, classic example. There are some in the white community who would ask the question, well, if you're Black and you're not guilty, why do you run from the police? Well, it's the experience that Black people have had with police who stop them over and over. And this does not mean a person who may be white is bad because he or she has not experienced that and doesn't understand. But we have to somehow create a picture so that you understand, and not come to the assumption and conclusion that, well, if you didn't run, this activity would not have occurred with you. Yeah. So, the reality is, sometimes some of our religious experiences have caused us not to expand consciousness, but to be put into a box. And we are programmed to feel that we must act this way if we want to be of our faith tradition. But there are other faith, not traditions, but other faith experiences that really talk about the expansion and inclusion and equity. And unfortunately, many or some in various communities do not speak that way. I don't believe we have to dictate that everyone should speak a certain way, but I do think we have to create the climate where we can all engage and become one, if you will, as close to one as we can. What that means is there may be 1,000 issues, and there may only be one or two that most of us can agree on. And so we have to work on those issues. And I think as we work on relationships, when we talk about the concept of tolerance, that's just a good start. I used to have a dog. I tolerated him being around. That was where I started. But at some point, our relationship became closer and it grew to friendship and then to love. Yeah. And so ultimately, the human experience, we hope, is that. Now, we do have to start with tolerance, because we can't do anything if you can't at least begin to tolerate someone else and understand their perspective. But then it hopefully grows to friendship and it grows to love. And then maybe you can really make great strides, because one of our biggest problems as a nation is we are so divided. And I don't know if we just don't know it. I do think, and I'm going to be a little bit tiny bit like Dr. Smith by taking a position that some may consider controversial, probably not maybe not on this call, those who are listening, because I would love to have more listening. But the reality is the world is changing dramatically. And I think that European cultural supremacy, when we talk about the concept of nationalism, is taking its last breaths. Now, that still may take a long time to get where we need to go. But that is what is a reflection of what we're seeing around this country and what was put on steroids by the previous president in his ability. That's not what in his mind, that's not all he was doing what he thought he needed to do to be able to win, which is to rule by division, to create wedges. But he also spoke in a language that many who happen to be afraid, people are afraid that, the United States specifically is becoming a majority nation as the Latino community grows and as the Black community grows. So in a very short period of time, we're going to be a minority majority country. And by the way, when I say minority majority, I don't really like minority, and I'll explain why very quickly. So I think we've got to figure out a better way to characterize people. In this context, it works, but let me explain what I mean. Majority, we know automatically means more than. Minority means less than. So I feel that when you begin to refer to people as minority, that's a minority interest. Automatically in your mind, what comes up is less than. So you subconsciously, not consciously, begin to treat someone as if they're less than you. So we've got to figure out a new way to define those who are not in the majority. And that's why maybe the concept of communities of color comes up, because that is one aspect, but I think we've got to even go further. So academically and from a scholarly perspective, we need to think about that. But in this particular scenario, I did want to say that we're becoming a society that is, those who've been in the minority in terms of the population are soon going to become those who are in the majority. And as a result, I think those who've been in the majority are fearful. And, I think, again, if we look at what happened when Harry and Meghan, Prince Harry and Meghan came and talked about their experience, which was very interesting. We can criticize whether they should have or shouldn't, but the fact of the matter is it happened. And it has created some dialogue from, the United Kingdom and from the Crown. And it's uncomfortable dialogue. Race, when you're talking about race and particularly, again, European cultural supremacy. I mean, yesterday I asked someone, why is it that we in the world, when we say the Queen, you don't have to say, well, who are you talking about? People assume it's Queen Elizabeth. There are queens all over the world. There are queens in Africa. There are queens, certainly of queens in Europe. But the fact of the matter is somehow we've been programmed to believe that there's just one queen, and that's where all the focus goes. So, again, that's what European cultural supremacy does. It elevates that which it wants to. And the reality is we've got to figure out, how do we elevate everybody? How do we elevate the nation? It's not about one group, one people. It really is about us working collectively. That's why Dad called it the beloved community. It's a community where everyone is respected. It starts with the concept of treat me with respect, or in a more simple way, treat me how you want to be treated. In other words, if we treated everybody, even in policing, if our police personnel started off treating people like they want to be treated, we would see a shift, maybe even a tectonic shift in law enforcement. That doesn't mean that you don't have to sometimes use not excessiveness, but aggression. You don't have to be assertive. But it does mean if you start off with respect and dignity, at the end of the day, you probably will come out with a different conclusion.
Amen. Add to that, thinking about how one wants to be treated, and you should treat someone how you want to be treated. There's this idea of equity right now, of treat someone how they want to be treated, because we're all not coming from a place of equity. And we talk about equity versus equality. So equality is being equal. And if we have systemic racism, which we do, we can't talk about equality. We have to talk about equity, of bringing people to a level that is actually equal. So equity is far more important. And going back to your question, Bob, about what we can do, there's an idea in Judaism, a lesson, a teaching, that you can only really affect and change what's 4 feet around you. So basically a box, 4 feet around you. Community members, yes. Family, neighbors. What kind of conversations are you having? Who are you talking about certain policies in your community, certain laws you want to change? 4 feet around you, because that creates the ripple effect. Huge change does not happen overnight. We know that. And what we've been seeing now, I believe, in the past year is this collective moment of grief. We've been in a moment where we're in a global pandemic. We're in a pandemic of racial injustice. We're in a pandemic of economic instability. And there's a collective moment of grief. And we can all relate to that, because I am sure all of us and whoever is watching right now, we have all either lost someone or we know someone who has lost someone. And it's a familiar experience. And with this, we can learn, one, resilience, but two, this idea of how we are more confident when we deal with adversity. And so 4 feet around us, what can we do? And I believe that, to echo this idea of tolerance, it's more than tolerance, right? It's respect. Because we don't need to just tolerate one another. We need to respect one another. And it's that, to me, is the lesson of every faith tradition, is respect and kindness and meeting people where they want to be met, not where we think they should be met.
Can I just tag on to that? Because I think that is so, that's where I was going to go. And by the way, I can't let this go without telling Brother Martin, when I hear Queen, I still think of Aretha Franklin. But listen, I really, really want to go back to where Sister Susan Sloane just took us, because at the essence of the question is, how can we be inspired as people of faith off of the pews? And I think what is so awesome about Dr. King and his message is he didn't allow us to compartmentalize our faith. He didn't allow us to say, well, we can be good people on Sunday or Saturday, whichever is our worship day. And as long as we're good people, then it does not matter. And I'm so glad to hear about this Jewish tradition of 4 feet around you. Dr. King certainly he inspires me that there's no way I can be a person of faith and not be concerned about my brother or sister. So I can't compartmentalize my experience, but I have to say my service to my community is equivalent to my worship. It is the way that I practice my faith. And so in many respects, it's not just my faith, whether I'm Jewish, whether I'm Christian, whether I'm Islam. It is not just ideals to which I ascribe, but my faith is who I am. My faith is how I live, and my faith is how I love. And if we as faith leaders could just continue to do the work of inspiring people to live their faith, then you can't watch your brother and sister, might make some people mad, and that's not my intention, even if they're different ethnicity, even if they're different in terms of their orientation, no matter what it is, those issues are issues, but fundamentally, my love for them, my ability to be with them is an extension of my faith, and it's who I am. And to me, that is the most positive inspiration you can have. And I think Dr. King, we always put him, and Brother Martin, please excuse me for saying this, nobody knows him better than you, but we always put him in the role of civil rights leader, and we forget him as a Christian minister who, yes, very much influenced by a lot of other philosophies, Mahatma Gandhi, all of these others, but fundamentally the teachings of Jesus Christ. And Sister Susan, that fundamental Judeo-Christian belief that I am to love my neighbor even as I love myself. That, my brothers and sisters, if we just do a better job at that, then I can't watch you suffer. And I compartmentalize that and say, well, that's them, and there must be a reason for their suffering. No, when they suffer, then truly I suffer as well.
I know the time is going to move very quickly in this, because as we can see, and I'm grateful for all of the questions that bring other voices that are on, because Bob, you have us on a roll here with that particular
great question.
We're grateful.
Great question.
Great question.
Thank you for your
and again, for all of our leaders here and those who are coming on, that we want to be able to address these. And so we want to help individuals to get involved, and to know that as faith in our faith community, all of us together, that we are challenged to make certain persons move from what we call contemplative faith participants to active transformational agents. And that comes from an encounter with the holy, an encounter with the divine. And as Dr. Smith said, preparing people, it's not just preparing them to be worshipers. It's what happens after that takes place. And we're preparing them for what they're going to be in transformation. So I'm grateful. We've got Nancy, who has just come up on the screen as well. Welcome, Nancy. It's good to see you. I know Nancy, so I have to smile when I see Nancy for everybody, but please, Nancy, bring your question.
Thank you, Leonard. And I'm actually going to follow up with Bob's question, because I was so moved during the session, Dr. Bird, that you did about how you spoke about youth and about how, you know, the youth is behind us, and how are we going to really capture the enthusiasm, the power. And, you know, I would believe that the youth went into everything that they did at Black Lives Matter Plaza and across the country, recognizing they were willing to live the consequences. And I look at you, Sister Susan, about the 4 foot wall or whatever, you know, whatever it was. How is it that we increase that wall? Because you guys talked about connectivity, community, standing together and using our feet. So how do we expand the wall, including our brothers, sisters, our youth, because they're the ones that are going to lead us. And I'd love to hear you talk about that, because I think that's where, you know, even Whitney Houston, which could be another one, it's our youth that are going to set us free, and they're our hope.
Yeah, one thing I see in this is we got to go from and help the people go from small circles of self and nationalism or these other isms to broader circles of oneness and humanity. Let me give you an example. I mentioned earlier, I have an organization that works with those who were extremists, religious extremists and racial extremists. There's one individual that used to be a leader in the white supremacist movement, one of the top leaders, and he had 2 children. One was 3 years old and one was 6. So this guy, he's a stone hard white supremacist racist. He's done some bad things. And this one day he's watching a television show with the 3-year-old, and they were laughing. I mean, just laughing. And the show was an African-American show, all African-Americans, and it was a comedy, and they were laughing. And the 6-year-old came in and violently turned the television off, and then turned to the father and say, "Daddy, what's wrong with you? You know, we don't laugh at these." And he used the N-word. And then Daddy was still in the laughing mode. Now he's not an extremist anymore. He's working because he's not with the FBI and others doing things. And he was telling the things that helped him come out of that. So Tommy, going from the small circle of self and nationalism, this is what happened. He looked at a 3-year-old who has no comprehension of this ism. He's in a natural state of being a human being. And he looked at himself, he was kind of calm, and looked at the 6-year-old and what he had taught that 6-year-old. And he began to see a universal in laughing and humor and just being human. And in that moment, he was starting to go from that small circle that he had put himself in, and to begin to broaden that circle. And eventually that circle became broader till he no longer is in that narrow confines of white extremism. So this is how we have to get and connect ourselves with the oneness of the human life. And that will broaden us and cause us to come out of these walls that we put ourselves in.
Short comments to think about. Everyone now, rightly so, talks about the pandemic causing X, Y, and Z. If you're Black, if you're Latino, you've been in a pandemic most of your life. So you can't just talk about the pandemic. Another thing is there's a writing on the wall in one of the slave quarters in a museum in Raleigh, North Carolina. And the slave is saying, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm on my way. We need to think about that. We need to go deeper into what is happening to us in the kinds of questions that Bob and Nancy are raising for us. But I'm of the opinion that CNN and MSNBC will not create my narrative for me. They just won't. But that's what's happening. What they say is that's where we get it from. I don't need MSNBC or Fox or any of them. My narrative comes from my experience with my Creator, with how I have lived my life, how I've taken whatever walks I have taken. But it is clear to me as a bell that as long as we are trying to get by, and many of us are really trying to do that, we have to keep it in perspective. The pandemic, going back to what is normal? When you say we want to go back to normal, I have no clue what that means. Go back to normal. Normal is what got us where we are right now. So I have to think about that. And then the last thing I want to say to Nancy's question is that in my reality, I realize what I don't know, what I can't understand, and how I have to confess the anger that wells up in me when I see what we are all seeing happening today. And it's not just the George Floyd, it's all those 500,000 plus people whose face appears at the end of a broadcast each week. So I'm struggling with my own inability to stay inspired because of the pressures of what I'm under in my daily walk, in my relationships with people. So I'm honest about that, and it's a real struggle for me.
Nancy, but before the pandemic, I remember reading an article, this was a few years ago, about a young white supremacist who was at university, and he was on different talk radio shows and was writing, and he was a huge leader in the movement for white supremacy and white nationalism. And I don't know if you already know this story, however, I'm going to tell it to you anyways. He found himself on campus, and people on campus, students and professors, found out that he was this rising star in this movement, and he got ostracized. Students wouldn't be friends with him. He got kicked out of clubs, and he really became just this parasite on campus that no one wanted to deal with. However, there was a few Jewish students who came out, and they invited him to a Shabbat dinner. Now, this is a very rare relationship of both the rising star of the white supremacy movement and a bunch of Jews. However, he had no other friends to go to, and he was really ostracized. And he said, "This is such an odd invitation, I'm going to go." And he went to the Shabbat dinner, and over time, he started coming back, and they met him where he was. And he moved on from being a white supremacist and was not the rising star anymore and denounced white supremacy. And he became a person of faith, of a different mindset. And it was from this openness. Now, I am sure those group of Jewish students were probably a little bit fearful inviting this person to a Shabbat dinner on Friday night around their table. However, it's something to think about more generally. Now, I know we're in a pandemic and we don't invite people into our homes right now. However, this is going to change with more vaccine, and as we continue to see people in a different way, we will be having people at our dinner table. And I believe we have to know, who do we have, and I'll go back to the table, who do we have around our own table? Who are we inviting to maybe Shabbat dinner? Who are we inviting to maybe Sunday dinner, Sunday lunch? Who are we inviting for any kind of celebration or faith gathering? Maybe there's food involved that gets people to the table. But how are we doing that? And I do see that this generation of young activists, millennials, Gen Z, they're trying to figure out, and I'm an older generation of millennials, so I can include myself in this, but we're all trying to figure out, what do we do and how do we know one another? And exactly going back to Reverend Smith saying, what do I not know? And saying, it's okay, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn and I want to learn. And so we need to be together, sitting at the table together and having sometimes difficult conversations. But we can all think about who we are inviting to the table. Who are we inviting into our own homes? Who are we socializing with? Who are our friends? And looking around our friend groups, who is there and how do we incorporate different voices so we can understand each other's lived experiences, so we can have a better community, a stronger community. And going back to your father, Dr. King, as we all know, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And we need to love one another. And in order to do that, we need to literally see and sit with one another.
It takes, and I'm grateful, it takes work. All of us have to commit to doing the work. I'm grateful for the questions, but even related to, as I said, there are consequences that come along with the work, even if it's just the expression that I am exerting myself, that some don't want to exert that kind of energy or sacrifice of energy to move from where I am. And so I'm thankful, as this has been raised, and even Susan has pointed to, it begins sometimes with just a cup of coffee, as we said. Who are you sitting with for coffee or lunch? She said socializing. We are admittedly in segregated sometimes and isolated, of course, beyond this moment, but isolated situations and circles. I hope in this moment that people are looking at these leaders. And again, I say thankful for those who have joined in this conversation today and wondering, how did we get together? That they're looking at this screen and wondering, how are we, and what is our willingness to do this that might encourage others to do the same in their areas, in their communities, in much larger ways, denominationally, all of these areas. So I hope that it'll move us. Certainly as we and I've got, Imam, let me address this at you, and you can respond to this as well too, because I do have something pointed that I wanted to give to you as well that came from, it was passed to me, of course, from those working behind the scenes, but it was brought up, it says, and I'm gonna read it to you as it's come to me. And it's from Nancy Evans, who says, I'm part of a ladies interfaith group in Dayton, Ohio. I was excited to join, hoping I would increase my knowledge about the Muslim faith. But then I learned that other sects don't see them as true. How can she better understand the faith if she's only learning from someone that's not considered to be mainstream? And she knows that this is a problem, she says, as she knows there are so many Christian denominations. She wants to know, how does she work her way through that? And so in the response, it was coming, you were coming right there. So can you help, because we have plenty out there that are looking at how we work this together. Could you address that for her?
Yeah, actually, that's wonderful. In fact, I was going to just say to Susan, I'm looking to be one of those that's invited to a Shabbat.
I'll be happy to have you.
And really, that's the answer to the question, that she needs to look for those leaders in those faiths who are embracive of humanity. And of course, if their faith don't have an expression that welcomes the broadest of humanity, then of course that's where the question comes in. So we look, I'm one of them, there are many, there's so many like programs like this that are engaged in these kind of things, that's seeking to bring people together. Anything that brings people together upon the best of their human aspiration and their inherent goodness, that's something that's coming from Almighty God, and we can have faith. We mentioned we can have faith in it. We can trust that You know, we have an expression that says aleikum and fusikum. Your own soul obligates you, you know. And of course, it knows, you know, babies sometimes, when someone holds them, they may cry because they sense something in the soul of that person that's not comfortable. And that person might just be uncomfortable holding the baby, maybe scared, but the baby, because their souls are so sensitive when they first come here, that they may make some noise. And that maybe some babies, they may go to somebody and that parent might say, they never go to anybody. They just talk to that person because they are sensitive in their souls. But we never really lose that. We just sometimes stop listening to that. And if we just continue to listen to that, that's coming from our own souls, and of course we know that our dear Dr. King mentioned that he was listening to something within him, something inside of him that was causing him to move. And of course, you know, his son is upon that inheritance and carrying the Drum Majors Institute and doing some dynamic things upon that inheritance as well. But again, listening to that drove him to the broader body of human life. So this is what we think they should be looking at.
Well, as the hour has moved so quickly, we hope that we've been helpful to those that are there. I'd like to close this certainly by asking the panel just very succinctly to address this one question as succinctly as possible. And it is the question that we begin with. We get off of this call, where do we go from here? Now, this could be practical. It could be just an advice, personal, but I'd like to ask the question and to put this forward as many are coming in, and I'm being told that individuals are just looking for practical steps. What do I do? And sometimes I think we're talking about it, but it becomes so large. Could we make this in your own personal ways? And I know we all do it differently. We're gonna hang up in 3 minutes. Where do we go from here? And so could we go around for just a moment and address that? And I'm going to ask, yes, and I'm going to ask in advance that as we prepare to close, Dr. Bird, pre-prepared for our closing word of prayer. Please, Dr. Smith.
Mine is, it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. That's where I start. It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer.
Yeah, I'd like to say a quote from Dr. King when he said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. That's our call to action.
I'll take a word from one of our current leaders right here in Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. She spoke recently about we have to continually remind ourselves to reinvest in our children and the communities in which we live. And what I love about being natively from Atlanta, even though I also reside in Washington, D.C., is that she said about Atlanta, and I think this is more broadly, we can say this about our own cities, our own country, our own communities. Atlanta is a city too busy to hate, but not too busy to love, and not too big to care. And so I challenge all of us to step forward in that.
I would like to say, as it relates to where do we go from here? We've seen chaos, and we see chaos frequently, far more frequently than we should. As God's highest creation, humankind, we should be doing better. We should be in a different place. I think that everyone has to decide what it is that they may want to do. And, you know, it doesn't have to be gigantic. It can be very small. You know, I went to Antioch College with my mom many times. And when I was 14, I was basically inspired by a statue on the campus and the inscription on that campus statue. And that was the statue of Horace Mann. And what the inscription said was, be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity. And when I first thought about that, I said, oh my gosh, I'm not a corporation. I'm not, an elected official, not at 14 or 15. How do you do this? And over the years, I began to break those words down. And I said, first of all, you can win a victory on your street or in your neighborhood. You can win a victory in your school. We can win victories in our places of worship. Some of us may win victories in our city. Some may win victories in our state. Some may win victories in our nation, and yet still some may even win victories in our world. But all those words mean are, be ashamed to die until you've done a little something to make the world in which we all must live a little better than it was when you arrived. And no one can tell you what that is, but you have to let your heart, let your conscience be your guide. Dad also said, the ultimate measure of a human being is not where we stand in times of comfort and convenience, but where we stand in times of challenge and controversy. Right now, we're in the midst of controversial times, but I believe humankind ultimately will choose community.
Certainly, as I prepare to turn it to Dr. Bird for your final input as well as the prayer, let me say, Martin, I want to thank you for that, because as I was thinking in one direction, just to join in, my father gave me a Bible that I have, and written in it is the wonderful quote where he says, time is not measured by the years that you live, but by the deeds that you do and the joys that you give. Mm. And there comes a point in all of our lives where we are feeling time's impact on us. And whether or not it has been the result of outside circumstances or inside, as we move through life, we are embracing, what do we do with the time? And so I would like to encourage many of our listeners who have joined us today to even just pick up the phone and contact someone who would be surprised to hear from you today, to just make a call, to invite someone into that space, that 4-foot area, or the circles or the ripples, but to invite someone into a space who you might not just touch them by the tangible reality of your call, but by the spiritual expression of invitation to join me in my space. And so I hope that this will be different. I say, as I turn it over to Dr. Bird, I want to thank Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm sure you get doctor all the time, but Martin Luther King III for his partnership in this, his friendship, the working that he has done as we have had individuals, but with the cathedral as well in these recent years. I am grateful for Dr. Smith, for his wisdom, his experience, his friendship as well throughout these years, and his voice in this moment that allows us to not just talk about where we are, but someone always said that you have to know where you've come from in order to be able to know where you're going. Yeah. Imam Talib Sharif, I cannot thank you enough. Another great friend of the cathedral and friend as well, and in his voice and in his presence for joining us in this conversation today. And then, of course, I cannot say enough about Susan Sloane. As we've met years ago, but to see what she's doing and the work that she's done has been an inspiration to communities, me personally, as well as all of the work that we get to do together, and her voice in his presence. We are certainly encouraging Lauren Holzblatt, who could not be with us, that she'll feel better as well, and looking forward to going further. And then as I turn it over to Dr. Bird, I'm so grateful for his leadership, his as a colleague, and of course, as we say, walking and searching and seeking together, one who is always willing to pick up as we say, what is needed for the battle and the journey that's ahead. And I often say, I'm just grateful for his enthusiastic spirit. No matter what is taking place in that you get that, let's go get it. And so I want to turn it for your, of course, response to the question and close us with a word of prayer and thank you to each and every one that has joined us.
And let me just start my brief remarks with a thank you to you, Reverend Hamlin, for your leadership and your ability to bring people together. I think the National Cathedral has a treasure in you and in your relationships and in your openness and willingness to facilitate the kind of conversations that matter. This conversation, the initial one, this one, and other programming that you've had where you've allowed this dialogue to take place, it matters. And so I thank you for being effective and efficient, meaning you do what matters. And that's important to us, and we need you. And so I'm grateful for where you are. And I believe I've said this to you privately, I'll say it to you publicly. You've been called to the National Cathedral and to this platform for a time such as this. I'm reminded of a sermon that I've listened to over and over again where Dr. King, I think it was called, had to do with being a good neighbor. And in this particular sermon, he took the text of the Good Samaritan that Jesus, this parable that Jesus taught about this Samaritan man who came across another person who had been beaten up and left for dead along the way, and other people in the community who were very prominent. I won't tell the parable. It's in the Bible. Came by. One was a faith leader. One was someone else. But all of them passed this poor gentleman by. But it was this Samaritan who, of course, if you know biblical history and Judeo-Christian history, the Samaritans weren't necessarily looked upon. That's why we generally call this story the Good Samaritan, as if a Samaritan had to be distinguished by being good. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. Stopped by, took care of the man, took care of his bandages, took him to a hotel, and then paid in advance for this gentleman to stay there, and told the innkeeper, anything this gentleman needs, I'll take care of him. And Dr. King just kept nailing, and I'm hearing it in my spirit now, who was a neighbor to this man? And with all that's been said, and again, I have been so impacted by everybody's comments today, but Susan Sloane, your comment and your education for this Jewish belief around these 4 feet around us, I think as
we lost your audio. I think it certainly, Dr. Baird is coming.
Am I back?
You're back now.
Is that better? Is that better?
Yes, you're clear. As soon as I said, of course, you're clear.
Okay. And so the question is, where do we go from here? Let's be the very best neighbor.
That may have been the.
Let's be the very best neighbor. With that said,
he's breaking up.
Yes, I think even in our closing, that as we look at the challenges, we could take lessons from this moment of everything that we have to overcome and work through, and that we have been working through, especially even with the digital challenges, but in coming in and out, but being able to do the work. There we are. I think, is he coming back in now?
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Sorry about that. I was just saying, let's be the best neighbors that we can be, and I think that would be a good place to start, being the best neighbors that we can be in the areas and in the places where we have influence.
Can you close us with a word of prayer?
Yes, let us pray. God, our Father, we thank you for the privilege of this conversation, but even more so, the privilege of this spirit that we have been able to be blessed by and feel your presence, your spirit that has facilitated and in a real sense guided this conversation and these efforts. We thank you for Reverend Hamlin and the work of the National Cathedral as he continues to plow forward in the direction that he's being led. We thank you for each and every participant in this discussion and all of those who raised questions, whether in the chat or had the opportunity to give them in person. Help us, direct us, guide us in the way that you would have us to go. You are our creator. You are the one that has endowed us with our spirits, with our personalities, and even our hearts. So you make us better, that we can be better representations of you. In all of our humanity, let the world see you in us. Dismiss us from this call, but not from this cause, for we ask it in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Blessings to all.
God bless you, everybody.
Bless you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.